Now, here we go again. We have yet another confirmation that the Rian Johnson Star Wars Trilogy is still happening, and once again it comes from only Rian Johnson himself, because apparently he did an hour-long interview with Soraya Wilson of the USA Today, though as far as I know the interview itself has not been posted anywhere just yet, but she took to Twitter to say a few things about it, including this. I'm just going to post this now because I can see that I'm going to get a lot of requests. Yes, Rian's Star Wars Trilogy is still on. No dates or timelines because he has other projects going on, but it is happening. Okay here, and just very quickly before getting into it, as you may remember back in November of 2017, like a month before The Last Jedi came out, Lucasfilm officially announced that Rian Johnson would be doing a whole trilogy of films, and all that was said about them at that time was it would be separate from the Skywalker saga and would explore a new corner of the Star Wars galaxy. And since then, well, not a whole lot has been said about them by anyone outside of Rian Johnson himself, and usually only when he gets asked about them first, like I'm assuming he did here by how excited she was to report on it. And it's always about the same response, that he's still working on them, but he has other projects first. He said this very thing, or a close approximation to it, several times before at this point. It's always that it's still happening eventually. Problem is, we have heard nothing, not one peep about them from Lucasfilm or Disney in years now, and that includes at the recent announcement event where roughly 10 Disney Plus Star Wars series were said to be in the works, as well as 2 movies. There's also still the Kevin Feige from the MCU. He has a Star Wars project that they keep mentioning, but no word at all on Rian Johnson's films. Not even a, yeah, they're still coming eventually, like Johnson keeps saying. Furthermore, something else has happened in the meantime, the release of the High Republic era, which is a whole new era for Star Wars set 200 years before the prequels, one that's filled with almost all new characters, and is separate from the Skywalker saga, much like the Johnson trilogy was said to be. And though this era is comprised of only books and comics and also one upcoming series on Disney Plus called The Acolyte, I wouldn't be surprised if this is what the Johnson trilogy sort of morphed into, or the idea behind it, that they thought it was much wiser and cheaper and safer to start a whole new time period this way with just books and comics, rather than to launch a whole big budget trilogy that may never resonate with fans. There's also then what Johnson himself said not long ago, that he doesn't think in terms of world building or universes or whatever, that he can't imagine getting excited about that sort of thing and is more focused on the story in the moment and connecting with the audience, which, no, in itself is not a bad approach to filmmaking by any means. Not the best for Star Wars maybe, but not a bad approach in general. And I certainly get what he's saying, and I do absolutely agree that things have to work within the context of the story, and you shouldn't necessarily be including things just to world build. And I think one of the things George Lucas did extremely well was world build very naturally within the story. He would put characters in these very interesting settings, or introduce unique concepts or characters without them ever being the focus. Instead, you were just supposed to sort of accept them as is with no explanation, just as the characters in the story would treat them like natural, everyday things in their universe. In other words, though Lucas never made it about world building itself, it was always about the story and the characters, the world building still happened. You could tell he still cared about it, and it unfolded in this incredibly unique and organic way that not only made everything feel more real, partly because, again, the characters in the story never pointed it out and overreacted to these things, but left you fascinated by the world or galaxy and wanting to know more about it. And one of the problems with Rian Johnson's The Last Jedi, at least in my opinion, is it really didn't do this. There are no characters, concepts, or locations that really stand out and get you excited and wanting to know more about them, short of maybe the first Jedi Temple, but that was a location he inherited from the previous film and did very little with. And the movie ends up so focused on just the story that you end up sort of losing that unique Star Wars awe-inspiring feeling, like you've really been transported to this other galaxy. Though speaking of the movie that came before, which was of course The Force Awakens, it almost had the opposite problem. It threw so much at you that was, to be fair, pretty interesting, that we lost interest in the actual story itself and just wanted to have our questions answered. We wanted to know who is Rey, who is Snoke, what's up with the Knights of Ren, and so on. Which were all questions that Rian Johnson, with the next movie, was not interested in answering. And I mean, could there have been 2 filmmakers picked to make these movies that had a greater contrast in their approaches to movie making? You had the king of the mystery box and the master of subverting expectations, trying to tell one cohesive story, and it just didn't work. But anyway here, though you may be someone who truly loves The Last Jedi and or Rian Johnson or his work, which is fine if you do, I'm honestly just not sure he's the best guy to launch a whole new time period in Star Wars. I think Disney and Lucasfilm have realized that too, and did so a while ago, which is why they haven't uttered his name in quite some time. They're hoping people will forget about him and his trilogy so they don't have to come out and say, it's not happening. Because when or if they eventually do that, it will cause a storm of controversy. I can already see the article headlines now about how Disney and Lucasfilm caved into the haters and are racist or something like that. And yet another civil war in the fan base will be fought or continue to be fought. We'll again have Star Wars fans attacking and condemning each other because they either do or do not like one particular movie. And I, for one, am just sick of it. I'm sure most of you are as well. And I'm sure Disney and Lucasfilm aren't fans of it either, even though they seem to perpetuate it with some of their decisions or actions or even their silence at times. But you know, or better believe, they hate these controversies and having to deal with them too. I'm sure they hate anything that brings negative attention to one of their franchises and ends up costing them fans and then in turn money. When you're as big as Disney, I don't think the term any publicity is good publicity applies. Instead, it's just another headache for you to deal with, and again, potential money lost. Which is why I don't see the Johnson trilogy ever happening. They don't want that attention, they don't want years of fan infighting again, and a trilogy would take years to finish. They don't want all the progress they might have made with The Mandalorian just wasted, all the healing it brought to the fan base destroyed. Though yes, I realize the whole Gina Carano thing has pretty much started another large-scale battle anyway, and cost them even more fans. It's yet another controversy. But anyway, not to get into that right now or again, what's curious about this whole Rian Johnson situation is he keeps saying it's happening, which, yes, could actually mean somehow, some way, Disney and Lucasfilm still want to see it done, and either don't care about the impending controversy in the fan base, or don't think it'll be as bad as all that, or maybe they think if they wait long enough it'll fade away, maybe they feel if they wait a decade or so, there will be a shift of attitude around the sequels, especially if more context is built up around them in the meantime. But even if that is the case, even if attitudes around the sequels do start to change, which I'm not saying I think they necessarily will, that's still not going to change some fans' attitudes about Rian Johnson himself. He still has been very combative with fans on social media, which you could certainly say is because a lot of fans came after him first, and that he has the right to respond, which I think he does. As an individual, I think Rian Johnson should be free to say whatever he wants on social media. However, as a representative or as a once and potentially future employee or director of films, I think Disney has the right to look at his fan interactions on social media, what he has said in a more official capacity for or about Star Wars or against its fans, and say, you know what, we don't want you back because you let yourself be baited and antagonized by fans and you fired back. And if we're going to let you do a whole trilogy, I don't know that we can trust you not to do that again, especially because they'll really be gunning for you this time. And for whatever reason, whenever the media talks about the Johnson trilogy, they seem to completely forget the precedents Disney and Lucasfilm have already set in parting ways with directors. They even fired Lord and Miller in the middle of making Solo. So I don't know why when it comes to Johnson they can't seem to fathom the possibility that it could or already did happen again. Though yes, in their defense, Johnson does keep saying he's still going to do it. Which then leads to the question of why does Johnson keep saying this? Which is the question I get asked a lot in regards to this, and got asked again by someone as soon as this news dropped. And I'm not trying to go down the conspiracy rabbit hole here, and as I said, there's certainly a chance I'm dead wrong, and that the Johnson trilogy will eventually happen, but there could be a couple explanations as to what's going on here. Like maybe they're stringing Johnson along because they don't want him to say it's been canceled, or they're hoping he'll come out and say it himself, that he doesn't think he'll ever eventually have time for it, or he just isn't interested in doing it anymore. Or maybe they want Johnson to keep saying what he has been saying when asked about it to again avoid the outrage that would follow if he said it's been canceled. Or maybe, and this could be the most likely, he's trying to keep pressure on Disney and Lucasfilm, that he wants to do the trilogy and keeps saying he's working on it, just so they can't ignore it like they have been. Because whatever the case may be here, and even if you're someone who absolutely believes it will still happen, you gotta admit it's strange that Disney and Lucasfilm have said nothing about it in an official capacity for years now, And I do mean literally years at this point. And if it is still happening and if Johnson is working on it, why not at the very least mention it during that presentation a couple months back? If you're Kathleen Kennedy, why not just say something like, and we will still have the Rian Johnson trilogy to look forward to down the road? And while the answer to that seems pretty simple, because it's not happening, and if you argue back that they didn't want to mention it there and then because, for a good chunk of fans, it would have deflated the excitement of every other announcement they made that day, which is what someone said to me when I asked why it wasn't announced then, well then that too pretty much says it isn't or should never happen. I mean, when a sizable portion of your fan base not only doesn't have interest in a trilogy of movies that, when all is said and done, will almost undoubtedly cost over $1 billion to make and market, but when many of them will also actively try to boycott the movies and get others to boycott them as well, which I'm not saying is cool or right, but it would happen, well then you're just not going to do it. You're not going to take the risk. It's that simple, especially when behind closed doors, you're probably hoping to heal the rift in the fan base, despite aggravating it at times. Well, that's all I've got for this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think of all this. Do you think the Johnson trilogy ever happens? Do you want it to happen? Do you think he's the right guy to launch a whole new time period for Star Wars? Whatever the case may be, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.